Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Tech sector hiring slows, heat and trains reveal new infrastructure woes, and TikTok's news influence grows. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, some opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Renee Gutman, the former CISO at Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, and Time Warner. Renee, thank you so much for being on the show. Renee, can you hear me? Oh no, we have lost Renee. It appears to be so. Guys, do we want to bump off the live stream for just a second? The beauty of live video, folks. All right, well, we're going to keep going with the show here. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, 6clicks, for making the show possible. 6clicks, AI-powered, integrated content, risk, and compliance reimagined. You can, of course, join us on LinkedIn Live for the beauty of all things live video. Go to CISOseries.com, look at the weekend review page, and you can find the link there. And now we are joined by the former CISO of Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, and Time Warner, Renee Gutman. Renee, thanks so much for being on the show.
Happy Friday and glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're going to dive right into the headlines. We've got about 20 minutes, so let's make this happen. First up here, we kind of have two stories that we paired together, related definitely, and Renee, want to get your take on these. First up, Microsoft cuts security jobs amidst a weakening economy. Microsoft announced this week it plans to eliminate open jobs, impacting its Azure cloud business and security software unit as the economy continues to weaken. The company said it's honoring job offers they have already been made for open roles. The move follows similar hiring slowdowns announced by Google, Apple, pretty much any tech earnings call you're hearing about slowing down of hiring. At the same time, kind of our second story here, dozens of cities and towns are paying tech workers to abandon Silicon Valley. A growing number of cities and towns all over the U.S. are handing out cash grants and other perks to draw skilled employees of faraway companies to live there and work remotely. In October, there were at least 24 such programs in the U.S. Today, there are 71. That's according to the Indianapolis-based company Make My Move, which is contracted by cities and towns to set up these programs. So seems like they would know the numbers pretty well. All the major one-word name companies like Amazon and Google have been active in this type of program. And in some cases, local governments offering up to things like $12,000 in cash, along with subsidized gym memberships, free babysitting, and office space to make that switch. So Renee, these two stories, two different perspectives on the tech sector employment front, which up until now has been, let's just say, bullish to say the least. What are the perspectives from you on the changing hiring market, both from this apparent contraction as well as an increase in remote work outside the Silicon Valley commuting belt?
So a couple things. I heard today that the tech sector hiring has dropped by about 10% in the last month, and that's a lot, right? And I feel bad for people that are losing jobs or counting on jobs, especially at some of these big companies. That said, we talked about budget at RSA, and a lot of people thought that in cyber, the budgets would stay the same. So maybe this month we only have 690,000 openings instead of 700,000, but it's still a lot. So I heard this week that the government is actually starting an apprenticeship program to train people in cyber, and I think this is my idea. We move a lot of really smart people into these cities and towns. We train people at the local community colleges, and then they intern at the municipal governments, and they basically start fixing some of our infrastructure in these smaller towns. That's my idea.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. I mean, because so often, we've seen these, especially around election time, as that's getting closer now. We see these stories that local governments have all these vulnerabilities. They're just not able to keep up. I love that idea of being like, hey, we can. We can have both benefits of this, right? We can unpack, have a less dense Silicon Valley, more affordable cost of living, and have this very valuable service and get people trained to fill in all these very needed jobs.
Yeah, I think it's a great win for everybody.
That would be a virtuous cycle indeed. And I like the way your mind is thinking here. We've got another paired story here. So same kind of deal. Let me set it all up here. Canadian Airlines suffered delays and cancellations due to the Zayo outage. Another Canadian internet outage stories. If you'll recall the Rogers outage from 2 weeks ago, air travel across Western Canada was impacted last Thursday by an internet outage impacting the country's air navigation service provider, Nav Canada. This was due to a disruption in the network of Zayo, a telecommunications provider based in Colorado that Nav Canada uses in part of the country's western region. This wasn't a cyber attack, but was instead caused by a train derailment that disrupted two key fiber lines managed by one of Zayo's fiber providers in Canada. Then, meanwhile, a heat wave forced Google and Oracle to shut down in London as record temperatures hit much of the UK on Tuesday. Tech giants Oracle and Google suffered outages as cooling systems failed in London data centers. Oracle explained that the unseasonably high temperatures, getting up to, I think, 40 degrees Celsius in some points in London, forced the data center units to operate above their design limits. Overheating also hit a Google Cloud data center in London at around 6 p.m. Local time there. So, Renee, from a cybersecurity perspective, these two stories, I think, have a chilling message about the fact that infrastructure remains this key weak point. Nav Canada outage caused by physical damage on buried cables. In London, basically overtaxed air conditioning, and let's just tack on some realities of climate change also as well. Is it at all feasible for governments and companies to reassess infrastructure security, almost, I guess, a infrastructure supply chain, essentially? Say, for example, to avoid threat actors sabotaging an air conditioning system instead of going for a heavily fortified network?
Look, these stories, they're both troubling, and they're troubling for a lot of reasons. Because it just shows how complicated our systems are and how much we really do rely on electric, water, internet service providers, cloud providers. I think companies are going to have to go back in and look at their disaster recovery and their business continuity plans and really determine whether they reflect accurately what can go wrong in today's kind of this complex environment. And secondly, I do think that governments do need to play a stronger role here, and that they need to really investigate and they need to force some investment. And this is where I want to go with this. They need to force investment and innovation in critical infrastructure. For example, part of the story around the heat outage, it actually said that Microsoft had tested an underwater data center that was using natural cooling provided by the surrounding seawater. That to me is innovative. I've also heard that there's technology that can help trains to see what's on the track ahead of them to be able to avoid derailments. My position is the government needs to force investment, they need more oversight, and innovation needs to start happening in this area. What we can't have is driverless cars and trains derailing in the same decade.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, Microsoft for a couple of years now has been trialing like these either they've been doing stuff like sunken data centers on barges, but yeah, kind of utilizing that as a key way. And yeah, it's almost we're kind of paying the piper, I think, for a lot of infrastructure debt. We talk about technical debt a lot for a number of reasons, but infrastructure debt becoming a availability concern, if nothing else, which
Yeah,
becomes then a vector for cyber threats if people want to target those, right?
we need to design for security and we need to design for resiliency if we're going to stay ahead of the game.
And Robin Norris in our LinkedIn chat said Canadian and UK issues both fall back on the lack of resilient business continuity planning. And that's the only time I believe a smiley face has been done and related to a lack of business continuity planning. So thank you for that, Robin. Excellent point. Completely agree. Before we move on to our next story, of course, we have to spend a few moments now with our sponsor, 6clicks. 6clicks is your AI-powered GRC platform featuring a fully integrated content library. 6clicks provides organizations with a powerful GRC platform to build highly scalable risk and compliance functions and advisors with the tools to streamline and scale their services, saving everyone enormous time and money. Reimagine risk, improve cybersecurity, demonstrate compliance. For more information, visit 6clicks.com/CISO series. Now we have to worry about Sata Cables. The ever-innovative researchers at Ben-Gurion University doing the Lord's work have documented how SATA cables, those long 7-pin cables, you use them in your PC to connect a motherboard to a hard drive or other peripherals, can be used as an antenna to exfiltrate data. As usual for these types of exploits, the technique requires an already infiltrated machine, so it's kind of academic experiment at this point, although I talked to Stuxnet about that. However, it does reveal a weakness that had not been addressed when building these types of cables. Renee, does your spidey sense worry about the next step here, that a person or a team can read something like this, make something more sinister out of it? Ben Gurion University does this about, I don't know, once a year or something like that, where they say, hey, blinking router lights can be hacked to exfiltrate, to defeat an air gap, right? I love these stories. They're always close to my heart. I'm curious, like, how serious should we take these?
Well, I think we're so focused on things that we worry about and know about today that we're really not thinking about emerging risks. So I don't want to panic. But at the same time, what I think the researchers are trying to prove is that if an adversary really wants to get to an air gapped network, right, that they'll be able to do that. And you're right, you pointed out that the machine already had to be compromised. So it may not be easy, but it may not be impossible. So I think the takeaway from this one is that companies still need to start thinking about their OT risks. They need to think about their air gapped, and they need to think about physical security in the same breath.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out. Usually with these, it's just like menacing. Like they're just like, "Hey, here's this exploit. Good luck. I guess tape over your lights or don't use mechanical hard drives." In this one, they actually had a mitigation where they're like, you can actually introduce noise into your writes to defeat this, but it may burn out, especially if you're using an SSD. Burn out your SSDs a little faster, but small price to pay perhaps for air gap
Listen,
security.
if that's going to cause a critical infrastructure failure, then I say we worry about it now. Otherwise, I think we fix the first problem that we
Yeah.
have.
And then we'll worry about everything else down the line. All right. Well, next up here, car GPS tracker exposes location data. This was a big story we covered this week. Security researchers at BitSight found 6 vulnerabilities in a GPS tracker from the company Mycotis. The tracker includes a hard-coded password that can be used to remotely control it, access real-time location data, see past routes, and even cut off fuel to vehicles. The tracker also ships with a default password of the very creative 123456. The researchers finding 95% of sampled devices didn't bother to change it. The company claims that over 1.5 million hardwired GPS trackers in use across vehicle fleets, national governments, militaries, and law enforcement. So this has a big footprint. Renee, the story seems perfectly timed for comments by FBI Assistant Director for Cyber Brian Vorndran at Fordham University this week when he asked what happens when the adversary understands that there is perhaps one software factory that services an entire community. Here we have a B2B supplier basically pulling a SolarWinds attack on trucks, police cars, ambulances, military vehicles all over the world. I'm curious what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's a couple problems with this story, not the least of which is if you go online, I think I can still buy one of these things for $18.99, and I can actually get a six for $6 I can get an additional year of warranty. So my thinking here is that if you're a company and you put these things in, all right, firstly, hopefully your procurement team knows that these things I think are manufactured in China.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying this is state sponsored because I really don't know whether that's true or not. But I think that it tells the story that if you're going to put things into your equipment, use it for fleet, that somebody should be involved from a cybersecurity perspective and actually be able to test the product and to look at it. The second thing is, and BitSight pointed out that there was a web server attached to this thing. And I think it speaks to we need to know the systems that are on the network and those that are communicating on the internet. And those are problems that I think we can solve. And again, yeah, we already are have one software, that everybody relies on. So but I'll come back to it. For me as a CISO, it was always about what can I control? This is stuff that I can still control, including
Yeah.
testing things on my network.
Well, and especially not to say that vehicles aren't, terrestrial vehicles aren't extraordinarily complex, like they're systems upon systems to make everything work. But we were talking about a few weeks ago about maritime security and how like exponentially there are more systems from different vendors that you have to worry about securing. Slightly different problems there, but the same basic thing of we need to ensure that, especially as things become more automated, that we know what's talking to the network, we know where these things are coming from. Again, I mean, it's
And
the
did
old supply
anybody in
train
IT
drum.
even did anybody in IT even know about that thing? I once had a camera on a network that was manufactured in China, and when the thing needed to be fixed, the manufacturer said, "Here's the hack to get the camera to start working again. And they literally said to hack the software. I'm like, get it off the network.
Oh my goodness. That's that is a interesting support call for sure. All you need to do is just root your device. Okay. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, next up here, Russian malware groups spoof pro-Ukrainian apps. Researchers at Google's threat analysis group discovered that the pro-Kremlin threat group Turla created an app called Cyber Azaz, which is aimed at Ukraine's far-right military unit. The app claims it launches a denial of service attack against Russian websites. We saw a number of these kind of websites and services kind of popping up when the invasion started, but instead this app installs a Trojan on a user's device. So Renee, this is through a wartime context is basically a phishing scam, right? I mean, have you seen on the civilian side any improvements when it comes to things like phishing awareness or prevention? And is this even like a user problem at this point?
Well, again, I'm going to say there's two parts to this story. I watched an interview with Janice Delit, and she basically said that we have to assume that malicious software is part of the Russian playbook. So I think we all have to step up our game here. With that being said, I think this was more social engineering because that the people that wrote that thing were actually trying to, behave like they were part of the good guy group, right? And that's going to be hard, and it's going to be hard for your users. If somebody really wants to get inside your company, they are going to be able to socially engineer somebody in HR, I guarantee it, or somebody on your sales and marketing team to be able to do something and install something. So yes, I think we can do a better job training, but I think we have to start doing more targeted training. And again, the things that we can control are making sure that my endpoint, you know, products are working properly, or that my gateways, my perimeter fences are actually doing what they should be doing. But I think it's going to be too hard. It already is too hard to blame users for falling victim to something that looks pretty real.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, a determined actor, right, has to succeed
Yeah,
one time. And
yeah,
you can be you have the on a user side you can be right 99.999% of the time, and it's that one time.
yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is make sure your people know who to call if they have a question and they're not afraid of the security department.
All right. Well, our final story today, TikTok is the fastest growing news source for the UK. This is according to a survey conducted by the UK government's Office of Communications. In addition, nearly half of people using TikTok for current affairs turn to fellow TikTokers rather than conventional news organizations for updates. Furthermore, a quarter of US adults say they always use TikTok to get news, with nearly half of US millennial and Gen Z adults, those under 41s and under 25s respectively, indicating the same, according to the analysis firm Forrester Research. So, Renee, what problems do you imagine will stem from increasing numbers of individuals choosing to receive their view of the world from TikTok influencers, which seems to be the way that we were going? Weren't we saying the same thing in, I don't know, 2010 when it came to people sharing news on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with this story because I feel like what we're really talking about here is misinformation and disinformation, which I learned was the deliberate distribution of false information to cause harm. So I think that's really what we're talking about. And, further on in the story, it said that 3 out of 10 people really don't take the news seriously, but they look for an opinion about the news. Um, but I also read that TikTok's doing something about it. They're putting in place algorithms, and they're putting in place human moderators to try and, mitigate the risk of again of disinformation, which I think is probably the most serious problem that can come from this. But I started my career as a CISO at Time Inc. Back then, journalists had to have 3 sources of truth before they could publish anything. I think if we're looking for news to actually always be right anymore and perfect, I think that horse is out of the barn.
Yeah, and I would say to me, if I'm a media organization, my thought is if this is the case, then we need to find a way to meet people where they want to get the
Yeah.
news. And I think news organizations were so late to get on that on other social platforms. I hope that this is this is something that they can be like, okay, there's a way forward with this. We know where people want to get their news. We need to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? Go where the puck is going, or something like that,
Hmm.
or
Not where,
skate where the
not where
puck
it
is.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where it's going, and people need to pay attention. I mean, the signals are there.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, Renee, any story that you reacted strongly to today? A thumbs up or an eye roller in the rundown today?
I got a thumbs down, an eye roller. Makes me
Nails on a
so
chalkboard.
mad. nails on chalkboard. It's that one with the critical infrastructure, and I think we need to basically, unless we all want to move off the grid and we don't want to go anywhere, I think we need to pay attention here, and we're taking too much for granted. And government needs to help, but I think innovation also needs to step up and really think about what we're going to do to address some of, like you said, climate change, things that are happening around us today. We need to solve for today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Renee Gutman, the former CISO at Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, and Time Warner. I so much appreciate your time today. It was just a wonderful conversation. Where can people find you if they are so inclined to follow you?
They can find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And we'll have that. We have that up right now in the video feed. You can find it in the show notes as well. We, of course, also want to thank our sponsor, 6clicks, AI-powered, integrated content, risk and compliance reimagined. Remember to join us next week for Super Cyber Friday, where our topic will be hacking current events, an hour of critical thinking about how what's happening in the world can and will affect your security program. If you get that news on TikTok, even more power to you. Just go to CISOseries.com and click on the Super Cyber Friday icon to register. Of course, we'll be back next week with another week in review. The show starts always at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Mountain and Central People Time, you know the deal. And finally, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up every single weekday. Until next week, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.